Where'd you get that shirt?
Oh, this is I think she got it off Amazon, but this is my favorite college sports team.
Wasn't she just there?
She was just in North Carolina. Yep. So she actually probably got it from there. Usually she gets stuff from Amazon, but this one, I like these shirts a lot.
You guys, you love your film. Describe your little girls to us, and
So it's Celeste, she's just a ball of energy. Call her Rampage, because she's just always, she's got two speeds, go or she's sleeping. And she's always a troublemaker. She's always the one like jumping off things, just yelling at you and all kinds of things. And Bella, she's the more calm, cautious, mothering type. And she's more like me, she's more calm. But Celeste has definitely got her mom's personality to where she's always just gung-ho, ready to go.
You guys have a baby on the way.
Mm-hmm.
You're about to have a third child.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of going through your mind?
That's why I want everybody back. That's why I need everybody back here and everybody's safe.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. As promised on Friday, today we're dealing with the slip of the tongue in the sermon on the driveway that we all missed. Before we get there, please subscribe, ring the bell, like, leave a comment, and please share amongst your networks. And let's get started. When we add the 7-minute sermon on the porch to the 8-minute sermon on the driveway, we have a 15-minute statement by Chris Watts. That's a whole lot of talking. When compared to Patrick Frazee, who a year later hasn't made a peep to the press, these sermons were and remain true crime gold. This is essentially his first public version, which he gave against the advice of his mother-in-law, and it preceded his first confession by roughly 24 hours and change. Very likely the feds and cops also studied the same footage like hawks before bringing in the silver fox and subjecting him to a slightly tougher line of questioning. It's possible Watts thought he did a pretty good job during these sermons, that he'd convinced those asking questions. They asked something, he answered it, and then that was it. Easy. Done. Back to business as usual. Well, not quite, as it turned out. The moment Watts opened his mouth, he was on a slippery slope. He just didn't know it. There is a lot to mine out of these 15 minutes. Some people don't think so. Some people clearly hear some of the words and they think they completely normal. One thing that's very interesting about reality is when you see reality once, the first time, it's different to when you see it another time. It's almost when you like listening to music, when you listen to it over and over again, sometimes it can sort of lose, you sort of lose something. You lose that sort of novelty. But sometimes also a different kind of appreciation comes through. You anticipate things, you feel the nuance and all that kind of thing. And it's difficult to convey that to someone who, if you've only watched it once or listened to it once, it's difficult to convey that level of intimacy with it. I've written 10 books about this case. I've transcribed the Sermon on the Porch. I've spent a lot of time with it. And not only that, when you go through these narratives and you're dealing with all sorts of areas of evidence, you do want to link back what's relevant in the Sermon on the Porch to certain things. And I'll give you an example. When I first did statement analysis on the Sermon on the Porch, and this was in the week that it came out, so I think it came out on Tuesday the 14th, so I think it was around about the 16th or 17th, where they were talking about experts saying that Chris Watts wasn't telling the truth. Well, you don't need to be an expert to see that. But you do need to have experience with true crime and statement analysis. And one of the things I highlighted very early on in that particular post was when Watts mentioned the word earth shattered, and I've said that this is a potential red flag. This is flowery language and it's a potential red flag. And a lot of people lambasted me and ridiculed me, and they said that's crazy. You're just trying to find something to talk about. And then what happened? It turned out that Watts had used a shovel and dug a hole at the well site to bury Shanann in. And so you can argue that the earth shattering, that statement, had no bearing on reality. Well, actually it did, because the earth was shattered in order to put Shanann into the earth, right? How many of you out there have sort of dug a hole in the last day or so? And if you have dug a hole, maybe speaking to someone, you might use words that relate to that, like soil, earth, dirt, grime, sweat, whatever, in a statement, because that is in your consciousness. That is in your short-term memory as well. That being said, statement analysis, like polygraph tests, like hair analysis, like graphology, all of them are kind of pseudosciences. So it's somewhat scientific. There are some patterns there, but no one's going to say that this can't be used in a court of law. I mean, you don't really use statement analysis that much in a court of law. You might say, well, someone was inconsistent in their statements, but you're not going to say, you can't prove that something was psychologically relevant one way or another. But people who've read my work see that there's a interpretation which you either accept or you don't. And it doesn't mean I'm right. It simply means I'm pointing towards something. And what I'm pointing towards is either there or it's definitely there. So, for example, the earth-shattering thing, it is pointing to something. Whether you want to say it links back, that's arguable. But you can argue that it definitely links back, and that's the point. The whole nature of true crime is what the criminal tries to do. He tries to fragment everything and hide things away and break everything down. And it's the job of the investigator and the true crime writer to put all those pieces together and to find out reality from all these fragments that are out of place and hidden away. And so that's part of what we're doing when we look at these words and we try and intuit the psychology behind them. Bear in mind that no two criminals are alike, but criminal psychology is similar enough that there is some intertextuality between tells. The most significant slip of the tongue in the sermon of the driveway is one 99% probably missed. It was easy to miss because it occurs in the very last frame of the very last moments of the sermon. By then most people had found what they'd wanted and moved on. When we go to the final seconds of the sermon on the driveway, since Watts has sort of let his guard down, and I've provided a clip at the end of this where you sort of hear someone asking him a very casual question about his shirt, and I've also written a blog post about the backstory around that shirt, and there's also another blog post just about shirts in general, the way that the Watts family tended to wear matching shirts and shirts with words on them and so on. In any event, this woman asks him about the shirt, and Watts sort of lets his guard down, and he sort of chuckles about it and says he really likes the shirt and whatever. And if you think about it, the shirt he's wearing right there is the shirt he's still wearing when he's arrested more than 24 hours later. That night, he's standing on the driveway. That night, he will go to he will be summoned to Frederick Police Department at around about 7 o'clock that night. He will then have a 4-hour conversation with FBI agent Coda. Coda will then get him to say that he is prepared to take a polygraph test. Coda wants him to take it that night, and in the end they decide to do it the next day. Watts then comes in the next day at 11 o'clock and he's wearing the same shirt again. And then like that evening he's arrested wearing that same shirt. He obviously went to the Thayers wearing what he was wearing, and probably wasn't allowed to take anything from home. He had to just the clothes that he kind of had on, and so that's that ended up being the shirt that he spent his last day of freedom in, that sort of charcoal shirt. It was just an interesting thought. And interestingly, a reporter remarking about the shirt and him snickering about it, that sort of prompts this. It's a kind of a slip of the tongue, but in a way that's a little bit different to what I think you would expect. The reporter crosses the psychological sand and asks a question that reveals the press are pretty suspicious after all and haven't been playing all their cards. So when the press have been interviewing Chris Watts, it's not just been a case that he's been duplicitous, that he's been withholding stuff, that he's not been completely honest with them. They've also been playing a little game with him. They've been trying to get him talking, and one of the ways they've been trying to get him talking is by not kind of revealing everything they know and what they sort of suspect. And so when the reporter says right at the end, this is the very last question, and it's not even a question, it's simply kind of a open-ended statement. Right at the end, when all is said and done and they've gotten their scoop, they've gotten their material, the reporter sort of crosses the line, and the reporter says, "You guys have a baby on the way." And Watts blinks, and he responds just with "mm-hmm." And I don't think in the previous 15 minutes there was any moment where he responded in that kind of clipped, reserved, somewhat dismissive way. And what's interesting is, if you watch the footage just prior, there are moments when he's swaying around, but just prior to this, when he's talking about his shirt and so on, he's not swaying. His body's not swaying. And so as soon as he's asked about, "You guys have the baby on the way," the swaying initiates. And what's more, and you only really catch this when you play it a couple of times, you can see and hear him sigh. You can hear an intake of breath. So he's now asked right at the end about the baby on the way. He starts swaying, he says "mm-hmm," and you can hear kind of an intake of breath, right? And then the reporter kind of repeats the question, basically pushing him. "You're about to have your third child." And Watts kind of fobs him off again with "mm-hmm." And then there's a second intake of breath. Now, some people might shake their fists and say, "That's not a slip of the tongue. That's not what's slipping." But what it is the reporter letting slip what they know about the Watts family, that Shanann is pregnant. Bear in mind, they've been speaking for 15 minutes. Why not say right in the beginning that your wife's pregnant? It's not exactly a slip of the tongue, but it's slipping out, this whole thing of the pregnancy. And bear in mind, the word pregnancy is never mentioned the entire 15 minutes, right? So the notion of you guys having a baby on the way is something kind of slipping out. And you can imagine that Watts is really bummed out by the question. I don't know whether the reporters knew or suspected that he was having an affair at this point, but Watts himself wouldn't have wanted Kessinger to hear that question or know about that Watts would also just be very uncomfortable with the idea of that, of the knowledge of that floating around, and so he kind of answers the question in a way that makes it not very, it's not going to work as a soundbite, right? And as a result, I don't think it was used in any of the sort of mainstream coverage. More than likely, it sort of fell on the cutting room floor. What I want to address here is that a YouTuber referred to this moment when Watts went, describing Watts as angry. Now, what I want you to do is, go to the blog post and look at it and ask yourself whether he looks angry. Was he angry? He may have been annoyed at being asked a question, but if he was, there's no sign of anger. There's no outward sign of belligerence. There's no grimace. There's no frown or scowl. There's just that almost non-verbal response, right? A response that's not a response. And so I want to just relate this whole idea of, people have described Watts as a monster, as a sociopath, as a narcissist, as someone with a lot of rage and whatever. There's no sign of anger here. It's not in anything he says, and if anything, it's what he doesn't say or do. And this is a classic example of an introvert. It's someone who's keeping all their feelings locked inside. It's someone who, when they don't want to talk about something, they don't talk about it, and they are uncomfortable. One thing with introverts is they are often mistaken for not having emotion. So, often wives who are married to introverts feel like they just can't get through to their husbands. They feel like their husbands are unemotional. But the reality is their husbands are emotional. It's just difficult for them to communicate their emotions, right? And so when we see Watts here and we see this question about, was his wife questioned, you can bet that he's shitting his pants right here. He's gotten through the quarter of an hour just fine dodging the issue of Shanann's pregnancy. In fact, as I say, that word is the one word he doesn't ever bring up. He never brings up the word pregnant, right? And although it's brought up right at the end by the reporters, this effectively shuts down the interview. By invoking this aspect, Watts likely panics, and when he panics, he shuts down. He has nothing to say because when the chips are down, he does have no game. And what's very interesting about this moment, and presumably the FBI also watched it, they also got the footage from the media. Bear in mind, it was Detective Baumhofer who summoned the media. He contacted them at around 7 o'clock and said, go to the Watts home and talk to this guy, and let's put some pressure on him, and let's push him, but let's see what he has to say. And so, since it was law enforcement that dispatched the media, I'm sure law enforcement would have said, well, can you just give us what you got, and so, yes, if the feds were watching this, they probably took real notice of it. And the takeout was tread carefully around this guy. Don't push him. Be nice. Get him talking. Keep him talking. The DNA for Watts' interrogation, the strategy of it, was laid right here. Don't push him on uncomfortable subjects like pregnancy or are you having an affair. Get him talking, get him casual, and then hit him with a difficult question here and there. Pepper him with difficult questions, but in a nice way, in a friendly way. And so to get inside the apparatus of Watts' mind, what he's doing or trying to do through these sermons, is convince an audience of just one, Kissinger, that he's fine, that everything is fine, even though his family is missing. But while doing that, he needs to make sure he doesn't say anything about the pregnancy. That's the critical issue for him during this interview with the press. He doesn't want to, give up the ghost in terms of the pregnancy. And so when the media does, he makes sure, as I said, it's unusable. The fact that Watts is so secretive about the pregnancy, so shut up about it, does lend some credence to the idea, the possibility, that as late as Monday and in the few hours leading up to these interviews, Kissinger herself was still living in a fairy tale, unaware of the pregnancy. And by not mentioning it, Watts was doing his damnedest not to burst that bubble. Now, you can disagree with it and say, there are all these reasons why Kissinger would definitely have known about it. Fine, there are those reasons, and they're not bad arguments. All that I'm saying here is there's a potential argument that why is Watts trying so hard not to talk about the pregnancy? Isn't it because Kissinger possibly didn't know about it? And also, if Kissinger was in a 6-week relationship and found out that Watts' wife was pregnant, would she have stuck around? And maybe she would have. Maybe she would have said, is she pregnant? Maybe Watts told her it wasn't his child. We don't know. But there is some credibility also to the fact that she simply didn't know. She may have gone onto Shanann's Facebook and sort of seen a lot of the Thrive stuff. Bear in mind, she wasn't on Facebook herself. And Shanann put a hell of a lot of stuff on Facebook. So, it is difficult to imagine that Kissinger didn't know. But if we look at this behavior here, why would Watts not bring it up? And so, as I say, it's simply a possibility that maybe Kissinger didn't know. Bear in mind also, the gender reveal was that day. It was supposed to be that Monday. And isn't that why Shanann was killed then, to prevent the gender reveal? And we know that he argued vociferously with Shanann, saying, please don't do the gender reveal on Facebook. Please don't let anyone say anything about it. And Shanann sends a lot of messages, texts between her friends saying, Chris doesn't want people to know. We don't want to be public about it right now. Why not? Well, wasn't it because he was worried Kissinger would know? It's just a question. Maybe it's not. It's just a hypothesis. Conversely, if Kissinger did know about it and he knew she knew, why not admit that Shanann was pregnant all along? In other words, if Kissinger knew about the pregnancy and he knew she knew, why not sort of just speak openly during those 15 minutes and say, I'm not sure what's going on with Shanann. She's pregnant. She should have been at the doctor. Why is that missing? Why is that not part of the thing? Again, why kill her on the very same day she was going to do the gender reveal? Wasn't it because Kissinger didn't know, and if she did, she'd drop him and run the other way? And according to Kissinger's version of events, she found out through the media that Shanann was pregnant, and I think that was on the Tuesday, and that same day she kind of said to him, I don't want you to contact me ever again, and delete all our text messages. And so that is exactly what happened. If Watts' fear was that if she found out about the pregnancy she would leave him, well then that is exactly what happened. Based on what we know from their relationship, they never communicated again after Tuesday. Okay, and that concludes this episode. I'm going to be touching on another area, which is Chris Watts' response to kind of the situation he was in, and it sort of takes into two areas. The one is Chris Watts finds out that there's an emergency. In other words, Nicole calls him, and Chris finds out that Shanann's missing in this spiel, in this scenario. And then what does he do? Who does he call? What would anyone do who is innocent in that situation? So we're going to examine that scenario. And so it's the scenario where he's at the well site or he's in his truck on his way home. And the question is, what is he doing? What is going through his mind, right? And then we're also going to look at a clip where Detective Baumhofer kind of puts the same thing to him. They're standing at the bottom of the staircase, and Baumhofer says to him what his strategy is going forward. And then he sort of says to, and Nicole Atkinson's also standing there, and then he says, you guys can, even though we're going to do, as law enforcement, we're going to check this and we're going to do that, you guys are free to also do this, that, and the next thing. And then we look at how Watts responds. So it's basically a situation where it says, this is our game plan, this is what we're going to do to try to find Shanann. And then there's sort of chatter. And then we're going to examine Chris Watts's, what's going through his mind when this is happening. We're just going to look at his body language. And I'm not sure when I'm going to do that. I'm going to be concentrating on the Frazee trial the whole of this week. I want to encourage you guys to go through some of the videos. It's a fascinating case, a terrifying case, in some ways far more ghastly than the Watts case. Seriously, it really is very, very troubling. And I will probably only get round to those body language and what's going on in his mind videos this time next week, so in other words over the weekend. Meanwhile, thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Where'd you get that shirt?
Oh, this is I think she got it off Amazon, but this is my favorite college sports team.
Wasn't she just there?
She was just in North Carolina. Yep. So she actually probably got it from there. Usually she gets stuff from Amazon, but this one, I like these shirts a lot.
You guys, you love your friends. Describe your little girls to us, and
So Celeste, she's just a ball of energy. Call her Rampage, because she's just always, she's got two speeds, go or she's sleeping. And she's always a troublemaker. She's always the one like jumping off things, just yelling at you and all kinds of things. And Bella, she's the more calm, cautious, mothering type. And she's more like me. She's more calm. But Celeste has definitely got her mom's personality, to where she's always just gung-ho, ready to go.
You guys have a baby on the way.
Mm-hmm.
You're about to have a third child.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of going through your mind right now too?
That's why I want everybody back. I need everybody back here. I need everybody safe.